another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla and Mary. Ton of books, but I can recommend the best to you, and I have a very exciting episode today. I just got to chat with one of my favorite thriller authors, Mary Kubica. Her latest release, She's Not Sorry, is basically a Grey's Anatomy thriller. So say no more. Obsessed. I could not put this book down. I gave it 4 stars. It is just so interesting. And Mary is an author that has been in this space for so long. She writes these really great page turners. I think that they're the perfect bead treats. So we really got to chat about what goes into writing a perfectly paced, twisty thriller, and also kind of the state of the genre, how she feels about having to conform, if she has to conform to genre trends, things like that. We kept it all spoiler free, which you guys it was so hard for me because this book had so many great twists that really caught me off guard. And the second we ended the interview portion, I asked her about all of them because I just couldn't help myself. So pick up She's Not Sorry, available now, and listen to this really fun spoiler-free interview with Mary Kubica that I think will be perfect for any thriller fan, even if you haven't read the book yet. I am so excited because I am here with, I think, one of the best to ever do it in the thriller genre, Mary Kubica. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kayla. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So my listeners already know that I loved your new release, She's Not Sorry. Can you give the elevator pitch for the book?
Yeah, so She's Not Sorry is the story of an ICU nurse, Megan Michaels. She's a single mother, and she's working in the ICU where one day a patient comes. Her name's Caitlin, and Caitlin is unconscious. It's believed that she attempted suicide by jumping off a bridge. And Megan is taking care of her. And Megan's one of those nurses that she always kind of tries to keep a divide between herself and her patients and their families, just to keep herself emotionally detached. Well, with this patient, she finds herself getting drawn closer to the family and friends that come to visit. And as she does, it starts to become more and more evident that this patient may not have jumped, but may have been pushed from the bridge. And so then she starts to wonder, if she's inadvertently put herself and her teenage daughter at risk.
I mean this as the highest compliment. This book is like a Grey's Anatomy thriller. Like I could picture this being a plot line on Grey's, like just how Megan is, she becomes close with the family and then they're all characters and all of this is unraveling, and the hospital setting I found to be so interesting. How did you come up with this idea?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to say I love that Grey's Anatomy thriller. I think I'm going to have to quote that. So it was actually I know we're spoiler free here, so I'm going to be intentionally vague, but it was the twist that came to me first. And that's totally unusual for me. Usually I go in with just like a mystery and, someone is missing or whatever, I start like that and build from there and start to think of my twist as I get to know my characters. But with this one, it was the twist, and it came not like fully formed. It was more a concept, something that I wanted to try. And then I created the story to go with it. So it's hard, to talk about.
Yeah, I know.
But when you read it, it'll make sense, hopefully.
I feel like my brain is just exploding a little bit hearing that, because the twist in this was so good. And I want to talk to you. I guess we could just talk about twists now because you brought it up. So I'm a huge thriller reader, and sometimes I have to kind of take breaks in between because things can not become predictable, but it's so much more fun when you are so shocked by a twist. Your book, The Good Girl, that was the first I read from you, and I was reading it on a plane, and I will never forget when that twist hit. And this book, I was shocked. That's why I'm so shocked to hear you say that that's what you thought at first. So do you feel pressure when it comes to the twists? And then also, I think thriller readers are very critical, and it's sometimes if something is just thrown in and it doesn't make sense. I think yours work so well because they do make so much sense. So what's that like on the writing end?
Yeah, it's hard for sure. And I feel like this genre has exploded over the last 10 or 15 years. And there are so many incredible authors, coming to the scene that are bringing new ideas and new twists with them. So I'm constantly having to think, and just to like push the boundaries a little bit and think outside of the box and, what hasn't been done and what new twists are just, plays on the twist can I bring to my own book? So that's something that I'm constantly having to think about when I'm writing. And thriller writers, you're right, they're tough, they're critical, and everything in this type of book, it depends on the twist. If readers see it coming, unfortunately, they're probably going to be disappointed. Even if they love the story and they love the characters, if they can predict that twist, there's going to be an amount of disappointment. So I know that. um, and then I think, too, as a writer, the other challenge is that you want the twist to feel earned. When the reader gets to that point, they want to be able to look back in hindsight and think, to have that aha moment, like, oh, now it all makes sense. But you also don't want them to see it coming as they're reading. So it's a delicate balance. So it's a lot to really consider, and I obviously I do my best during the drafting stages to pull it all off, and then I have the benefit too that my editor, my agent, they don't. I will never give them the twist in advance. I made that mistake
Okay.
one time, and I learned my lesson because they're my first readers, and I want them to go in totally blind and to be able to see, did they predict the twist? And so they're my first guides in that. It's something a little too heavy-handed and I need to pull back, or and is it a satisfying twist too, or does it not feel completely earned? So that's hugely beneficial, just to have those eyes on it at that point. And honestly, from the point, my editor and my agent go through it, but then it goes through, I'm in a book club, and I always have my book club members read it before
Oh,
it's.
I love that.
So I really I work hard, and I'm never going to fool everybody. Someone will always see it coming. So sometimes I do try to have like multiple smaller twists thrown in, because then at least there's something that will hopefully surprise the reader.
It's so interesting to hear just from like the reader end, like I always wonder, first of all, how do you even come up with that? It just blows my mind. But then I feel like there has to just be like this added pressure because from reading has just become so cool and popular again. And like thrillers were my gateway back into reading. And I know it's the same for so many people. You mentioned like you'll try to look for things that aren't happening. So are you constantly reading thrillers?
So I read a lot of thrillers. I mean, it's my favorite genre. I'm sure that comes as no surprise. It's tough because I obviously, I don't want to be influenced by anything that I'm reading. I don't. Sometimes I'll read something that's just so incredible, and I get down on myself and think like I can never write that well, and so it's easy to really psych yourself out a little bit. But I do. I love them. I'm just constantly, aware of what are things that I like when I'm reading, because I think that's just the biggest indicator for me. If somebody, it's not necessarily like the twist or, but it's just how they're doing things. I know, like for example, The Kind Worth Killing, for example, no spoilers, but like smack dab in the middle of that book is a huge twist. And I remember at the time, it seemed just kind of like a novel concept to me that the twist doesn't have to be at the end. And so it's just little things like that I'm constantly paying attention to and seeing, how I can use those concepts, in my books, or just, try to build off of those concepts.
That's so interesting because I feel like now in most thrillers you'll see like so when I was reading She's Not Sorry, I forgot that when I opened it it said part 1 because then the twist and then it was part 2 and I don't think that's a spoiler, but because that has become very common in thrillers and I love when I forget that I'm waiting for like the second part and like something crazy is going to happen. How do you does it depend on the story with where you do the reveal and do the twist, or like what's the thought process really with that?
So I'm totally not a plotter. I go in, I
Okay.
mean, with this one, like I said, I knew the twist, but usually I don't know that much. I just, like Local Woman Missing, for example, I knew that I had, a couple missing, two missing women and a missing child. And that was it. I usually with She's Not Sorry only has one narrator, but I think all of my other books have multiple narrators. So the next thing that I usually decide is who's going to tell this story. And then I actually just pick one of those narrators at a time and write his or her whole story from beginning to end.
Oh, wow.
Which to me, sometimes it sounds complicated when I talk about it, but for me, it breaks it down. I'm in one person's head, and a lot of my books are not linear time wise. So, there will be like before and after chapters. And so this way too, I'm not jumping all around in time. I'm just in one place in one character's head. And it totally simplifies the process for me. But then as I'm writing and I'm getting to know my characters, I start to figure out, their backstory and why they're here, what has happened, and just sort of develop those relationships. And as I'm doing that, then my mind starts to think about next steps. So I'm usually like almost halfway into a book before I think of the twist, which is
Okay.
sometimes terrifying. Okay. Like, will I think of a twist? Are all these pieces ever going to come together? But it's also just the best feeling when I think of it. And I think that there's an authenticity to it that I hope that, the readers will have that same emotion when they get to the twist.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about this. I love it. Back to She's Not Sorry. So I want to talk about Megan, but I first want to talk about the hospital setting. I maybe it's because I have watched Grey's Anatomy my whole life, but you actually do this with all of your books. So I felt so there. It was very atmospheric the way you're talking about the hospital, like the machines beeping. I felt like like hospitals are like so sterile, and I don't know, I just felt like the anxiety that comes with being in a hospital. But then this case is so interesting because it's getting a lot of media coverage. So Megan is in the room like taking care of the patient, and people are talking about it on the TV, and it kind of felt like you couldn't escape it. So what was like the medical and hospital aspects like?
Yeah, it was tricky. I have no experience in that. But when I knew that I wanted to have this hospital setting and for my character to be a nurse, I had to get it right.
Mhm.
I had to be totally accurate with it. So I did a ton of research, and I mean, you can find so much online. You can find, blogs about a day in the life of an ICU nurse, and I mean, there's just a wealth of information. But I'm also really fortunate that I actually have three friends that are ICU nurses, and I had a friend in nursing school at the time. She's since graduated. So it was wonderful. So I reached out to two. I did this very methodically, but I reached out to two in advance because I knew that my questions were going to give a lot away, that they weren't going to be able to read it, blind. And so I just started with two, and I asked them my very interesting questions. And some of it was just like, what do you do? You get to the hospital, what do you do? And some of it was like far more specific medical stuff. And then I took once it was all done, my editor and I had gone through revisions, and it wasn't, ready to go to print, but it was pretty solid. Then I had these other two women read it so that they could go through and say, no, this is not how this would happen. And and so that was so helpful. And I mean, I can't thank them enough, because I think that them looking at it, giving me the information that I needed, the feedback, it was so beneficial. And from the nurses who have read it and commented or, sent me notes, it seems like, knock on wood, I got it right. So I'm really, it's always a relief.
I'm not a nurse, but it felt like you got it right to me. So I know you said that the twist came to you first, but then once you had the twist, where do you go from there? How did you get to Megan and to the hospital?
Yeah. Yeah. So with the twist, I knew that I was going to have this patient, in the hospital. And, I wanted someone telling me the story that, was very close to her. So I decided on, Megan, the nurse. And that was, when I started, that was actually all that I had. And I had during COVID, I had started a different book that is like sitting on a shelf somewhere. Actually, it's just a file on my computer, never to see the light of day. But I had actually started creating. I had different names for them, but it was basically Megan and Sienna's relationship. And
Okay.
so right away I thought I could reuse that. So I only had like a chapter or two at the time, but I just loved the dynamic between the two of them. And so I went back, I pulled it, what I had, I revised it so that it fit with this, where I was starting to go with this story. And I just loved it. So then in that, previous thing I had, the character was divorced. So then it led me to like adding in the divorce support group that Megan goes to at the beginning of this book. And so it just sort of built from there. And yeah, it's just like one page, one chapter at a time. And I never have any idea when I sit down to write what's going to happen. So early on in the book, Megan runs into an old friend from high school, and I didn't know that was going to happen until it happened,
Oh, I
and so
love
it was
that.
it was just little by little, and it's so fun. I mean, I just like I said, sometimes it can be scary not really knowing where I'm going, but I would never trade, I would never choose to sit down and write like an outline. I know there are plenty of authors that do it and it works for them, but for me, I think it would take something away.
Yeah, I feel like there's a magic to you just sitting there and it like coming, like pouring out. I think that's really cool.
Me
You
too.
mentioned, so Megan has a daughter, Sienna. She is divorced. I feel like she was such a well-rounded character. We got to see so many different things about her life that like her ex-husband is a part of it. And then there's also it takes place in Chicago and there are these crimes happening. So I thought you did such a great job of there were so many different things happening in the book, but it all made sense because it all was kind of centered around Megan's life. And like, as we're all walking through lives, those are things that we all deal with. So how does it tie together for you? And then I guess, you mentioned you pulled Megan and Sienna from another book, but what was writing like her family life like?
Yeah. She's when I'm writing, how easy, quote unquote, or hard a book is to write. It depends on how quickly I can connect with those characters. And with Megan, it was almost instantaneous. I
Okay.
felt like she's such a nurturing person. She's a mother. I'm a mother. I felt like there were things that she and I had in common. And there were I don't know, I have a daughter that's about the same age as Sienna. And so I could just really relate to her. And so that helped, that made me really be able to connect with her very quickly. As for just all the things that are going on in her life, I feel like my goal as a writer is to make the characters totally authentic. And it doesn't mean that a reader's going to love them or agree with the decisions that they make. But I want the reader to have some sort of connection with the characters because otherwise you don't care. There's no desire, or it diminishes the desire to really see this
Mhm.
character through to the end. So I feel like if I can create these really, really authentic, flawed characters, that's going to make them more relatable to the reader. And it's a balance too, because of course it's a thriller and it's all about pacing and things like that, building in the suspense. So I have to be careful to not like overdo the characterization so that it takes away from the pacing and stuff like that. So it's definitely a balance. And that's where too adding like a creepy setting in helps as well, because we get to know a little bit about Megan while putting her in these like sort of, dangerous situations of walking home alone at night in Chicago when there's a man out there that's been attacking women.
I think it's a testament to your writing because I felt like I knew Megan, and when she makes some decisions as the book goes on, it all made sense to me why it was happening. It didn't sometimes you read things or even on TV and you're like, what the heck is going on here? But it did all make so much sense. So speaking though about so basically if anyone listening hasn't read the book, she is living and working in Chicago and there's this guy on the loose kind of attacking women, following them home and then sexually assaulting them. I live in New York City and I know what it's like to be a woman walking around on the street. One of my very close friends was mugged very recently and it was very scary. And I now walk around very differently. And then I read your book after that and I felt like you just perfectly captured what it is like to be walking as a woman at night, like anywhere. Just she hears someone whistling and she like goes on alert. And it was just these very small things that it didn't even if it had nothing to do with the mystery. It just felt like I knew Megan and her life, and I love that you included that. And like there's really no question here, but I just felt so seen and like validated in me carrying around like my birdie alarm.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. And I do feel like so many women, whether you live in the city or wherever you live, will find it relatable, and I know, it's becomes more and more prevalent, unfortunately, all the time that, women are being attacked when they're alone. And we have to be so much more cautious. But yeah, I think that it makes it relatable. It's sadly a reminder that, anything can happen and we have to be very alert all the time.
Yeah. So you mentioned before pacing. This is something that, as I got back fully into reading like 5 years ago, and that's when I made my Bookstagram account and I started with thrillers. And as I read more and more, I feel like I pick up on like the technical things about it. And like pacing for me is a huge one, specifically in thrillers. And I think you pull it off so perfectly. And that's why I think your books are like the perfect beach read. I love to read about murder on the beach. So I did not read this one on the beach, unfortunately, but I would have loved to have read it on the beach. How are you thinking about pacing as you're writing, especially when it comes to those smaller reveals that always happen throughout?
Yeah, that too is something I don't really think a whole lot about in advance or even
Okay.
sometimes as I'm writing, but it comes back to me as I start to, I mean, I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I read over the manuscript before I let anybody else see it. And I start to notice those chapters that I'm constantly bored of reading, and there are those it's just kind of a gut feeling like this is going on too long, or I need to break this into bits and add some more suspense in the middle. And it starts to just become a gut feeling. And I do, though I am kind of conscious of, okay, this here I'm going to build a little bit more character, but then something has to happen. Or this chapter, one of my kind of go-to cheats is to like always end a chapter on some little cliffhanger. It doesn't have to be mind-blowing, but just something that's going to make the reader think and hopefully want to go on to reading the next chapter when they reach the end of one chapter. So I do little things like that to kind of try and keep the interest. I feel like a lot of readers will call me my books a slow burns, which I'm all for that. I feel like that, like building up the pacing and the tension it leads to like a greater reveal. I feel like it's more impactful that way. And like I said before, setting and characterization, and so many of those things are super important to me too. So it's a balance of all of it. And it's just like I said, it's one of those things that when I really start to go through that revision process, I start to kind of see where it's lagging and where it needs a little bit more.
How did you get into writing thrillers? Was there ever I feel like we do see a lot of authors these days who will write thrillers and then also romance, and it's just so opposite end. Was it always thrillers for you? Oh
It was always thrillers. I used to be a high school history teacher, so I say
my
that like
god.
on my bucket list, maybe historical fiction, but I don't know. I like just making stuff up in all honesty. Like the research, I mean, I obviously, like we talked about nursing, there's research in this book, but I don't have to like, set something in the 1940s or whatever, it's not that much research.
Yeah.
um, but no, so before The Good Girl was my first published book. And before that, I wrote, I didn't have any finished manuscripts, but I love to write, but they were not thrillers. They were more like women's fiction, I would say. And I would get in, partway into some manuscripts, and then I totally lose interest and, set it aside and move on to something else. And I could never figure out, I'd love these ideas so much, and then they would just completely fizzle. Like something was missing. And with The Good Girl, I thought I was writing just kind of a love story. I didn't know where it was going to go. I, went in blind as I do. And little by little, though, I started to work in some darker elements. And I had the before and after set up. And I knew that something bad was going to happen in the after at the end. And then I started working backwards. Well, what caused that to happen? And like little by little, a mystery started to develop.
Oh my
And
god.
so it was totally by accident. And even, that was the first book that I tried to get an agent. I did get an agent and sold it. And I didn't know what I had written. Like I couldn't give it a genre name. It wasn't until later, once it was with a publisher, that, it was decided it was psychological suspense, which I was very happy with.
That it's wild to me that that was your first, because I read it like 6 years ago now, and I like can vividly picture when I read, I picture it like a movie in my head, and like I could picture that reveal to this day, and that doesn't happen to me with all of them. So just a
Yeah.
testament to your writing and your talent.
Well, that one is very near and dear to my heart.
Okay, I have to ask you this because my I love thrillers, but I'm really a historical fiction girl. If you were though, like to write historical fiction, what would your like era be?
So I get this question a lot, honestly. And I would, I mean, World War II is obviously so hugely popular. The ironic, Kristen Hanna just came out with The Women, which is more
Yeah, I
Vietnam.
just read that.
Yeah, I downloaded the audiobook, and I have a couple like road trips coming up. So I'm saving it for that. But
That'll be perfect.
but I'm fascinated with the Vietnam era, the 60s. So I feel like it would be something in there, but I never really thought too much about specifically what.
Yeah,
But it
that's
would
so
have to be some
interesting.
sort of mystery, I think. I'd have to work the mystery in there also.
Yeah. Well, I love when historical fiction does have the mystery, because I'm like, I feel like I'm getting the best of both of my worlds.
Yes.
Okay, so you just mentioned like a trend within publishing. I'm really interested and I kind of challenge myself sometimes to pick up on the trends that I notice. I want to know, like, what do you think about the trends when it comes to the thriller genre? Do you feel pressure to conform? But also, I like this stood out to me, She's Not Sorry, as so unique because maybe you're like starting the new trend because it was just like the hospital setting was like I loved it already, but that just blew my mind because it was I've never read a thriller like that, which is hard these days because like the genre is very saturated.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I don't feel pressure to conform. And I will say, first of all, I've been with the same publisher my whole career, same editor, and they're phenomenal. And so that's one reason. There's never been pressure for me to do anything that I'm not doing, which I appreciate because I don't know that that's the case across the board. I feel like for me, my competition is myself, just trying to raise the bar with every book to do something that I haven't already done. And so whenever I go into a new book, that's really my only goal. And I feel like my readers, they like what I'm doing. And so I don't know that other than just like naturally like setting this one in hospital setting versus, the suburbs or whatever,
Mhm.
other than that, I don't feel like I need to do something totally new because it seems like my readers like this.
Yeah, I as a reader, I love to hear that because I don't know the other end of it, but I'll be like, "Oh, this is like now I'm wondering are we gonna be getting a bunch of Vietnam era books because of Kristen Hanna," which I wouldn't be upset about, but because I loved learning about it. But it's just interesting as I just read so much, I just pick up on everything. Kind of along that same vein though, have you ever like seen something that you were planning on doing in another thriller?
So I'm a firm believer that there are like a finite number of ideas. And especially, I mean, there's like kidnappings, there's murders. I mean, how many different kinds of crimes are there? There's many, but it's just the same as like historical fiction. How many World War II books are there?
Right.
So I feel like it's just the spin that each author brings to it. So I do every now and then I will be reading a book, reading a book to blurb or reading a book that's already out, and I'll think, oh, that's a little similar, and but I feel like nothing is ever going to be the same, whether it's in the twist or the characters or the setting. There's so many different unique elements that a writer can bring to the story. I mean, when I look at my own books, every now and then it kind of makes me laugh, but I have nine. I will have nine out when She's Not Sorry releases. And I think like five of them are about missing people. And so, but I don't feel like they're ever redundant. So it's just, the story that gets added to it.
And I love that you write about missing people because this is really messed up, but that's one of my favorite thriller tropes. So I love to read about a kidnapping, which I don't know what that says about me. I'll deal with that at another time.
I love that. That's awesome. It's so, I mean, sadly, it's something, we hear about on the news a lot
Mhm.
or in true crime. It's a common theme. And, it's different than a murder because, then it's a whodunit. But with a missing person, there are so many things to discover. Where are they? Why? Are they alive? Are they dead? And, there's so much more I feel like that you can do with it.
Yeah. So you just mentioned true crime, and I actually, to me, like thrillers and true crime, they are different. Have you ever like pulled inspo from true crime? Do you look at it when you're kind of plotting or like coming up with ideas?
I do. But it's never like this book is based on this story. It's never
Okay.
that. But I listen to some true crime podcasts and I it's more like the little things, just like some tiny detail that'll jump out to me. Of course, I cannot think of any examples now, of course. But it's like some little detail or I don't know that just fascinates me. And that's the kind of thing that I might borrow for my own book, but it's never the whole idea, or maybe like a true crime story does inspire something, but then when I sit down to write, it evolves into something totally different. It's just sort of a setup, like the players
Mhm.
that are there, but then the story is completely different.
That makes sense. And I feel like I've kind of outgrown my true crime era, but whenever there's a new doc on Netflix, I end up watching it. But I still get that kind of like fix from thrillers. And I think a lot of readers do that. So it is interesting to think about the crossover, if there ever is one. Do you ever give your books the Hollywood treatment? If there was like, if anyone could play Megan, because I have an actress that I pictured when I read it.
I don't. So I know I get this question so often, and I just draw a complete blank. And it's so you are going to have to share your idea. So when I get this question next time, I can say I can claim it as mine.
Well,
I
I have,
Yeah, go ahead.
you know, you go ahead. You go
I
ahead.
was just going to say that there's something when I write, I don't fully picture the character. I like picture their insides. I get them as a person, but what they look like, to me, it's like brown hair, brown eyes, or whatever. However, it is that I might describe them. They're tall, they're petite, but beyond that, I never have like a fully formed picture.
I have like a rotating cast in my head and I just like
Love
slot
it.
into different books and I have like a historical fiction cast, a romance cast. And for probably like a year now, I've been picturing Sienna Miller in kind of every romance and thrillers, I guess. And actually at a Taylor Swift concert this summer, I was on the floor and I walked past the VIP tent and she was sitting right there. And I was like, that's my character in all of my
It's
books.
amazing.
So she was my Megan. I pictured her.
That is awesome. Yeah, I could totally see that. That's a good pick.
So you mentioned that you do read a lot of thrillers. Are there any favorites? Like if you had to recommend a few, and then what are you currently reading?
Yeah, so right now I'm reading an arc of Heather Gudenkauf's Everyone is Watching, which is out. It's very soon. I want to say it's like 2 weeks, maybe the very last week of March, but it's incredible. It's like nothing that I've ever read before, but it's about it's like a reality TV show. A bunch of contestants are sort of like a big brother, like they're brought together to live in this one house, but they're not really sure, why they've been selected. And then some kind of dark and strange things start happening. And I'll kind
Oh
of
my
leave it
God.
there. But they're in it to win millions of dollars. So, I think kind of everybody will do anything to win that. And it's fantastic. I'm about halfway through and I'm just loving it so far. As for some of my favorite thrillers, S.J. Watson's Before I Go to Sleep. It's maybe 10 years old, but that's one of my all-time favorites. Um, I always draw a blank on titles, but I love Ruth Ware is one of my absolute favorites. The one that she wrote a couple of years ago that was set on I think it was Oxford, or it was modeled after Oxford. It was
The
it
It
was made.
Girl.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that one so good. I mean, that thing was like 450 pages and I just flew through it like it was nothing. I loved the Ashley Flowers book that came out, I want to say last year, All
Mhm.
Good People Here. That was incredible. Alice Feeney's Rock, Paper, Scissors is one of my all-time favorites that had a twist that just I didn't see coming at all. It's definitely one of those, everything is not as it seems moments. And gosh, I love Wendy Walker, Kimberly McCreight. There's just so many incredible authors out there.
I feel like the thriller genre is, I mean, all of them really, but it's just so stacked. And as readers, we're so lucky because I feel like you're just turning out books once a year. Like it's always a treat when it's like, oh, the next Mary Kubica book's out. I get so excited.
I mean,
uh,
it's in the reader response. I have to say, readers are amazing. I think and people like you, you're all what keep us going. It's that constant encouragement because we need that. But when everybody gets so pumped up about a new book or they read it and they're so enthusiastic and kind, it's just, I mean, even right now, like I'm slowly working on the next book, but as I see like positive feedback for She's Not Sorry, it gives me all the motivation I need to get on that computer and keep writing.
How has it changed kind of the reader interaction from the good girl to now? Because, I've had my Bookstagram for 5 years, but then Book Talk came and changed everything. And then now here I am with a podcast. So even just from the reader end, it's constantly evolving. What's that like for you?
Yeah, so I'm TikTok's Book Talk is the one that I'm struggling with.
Me
I
too.
it's hard, and the few things that I have posted, I have an account. I don't use it really very much. So if you commented and I haven't commented back, I just probably wasn't on. My daughter helped me set it up, and but it's a little beyond me. I love Instagram. That's my favorite for sure. Before all this started, I had no social media presence at all. I didn't even have a personal Facebook page. And
Wow.
I know I didn't get into it. I wasn't like super opposed to it, but I don't know. I just didn't pick up on the trends. And then my editor told me that I would need to get on social media and start connecting with people. And so It was so awkward at first, like especially Twitter X. I That was one of the ones that I did reluctantly get on, but I had no, like I had no followers. What do I say? I have no idea. But I took to Instagram especially right away because I love pictures, and so that was great. But I just, things have evolved over time, and especially, during the COVID years now, we're Zooming all the time, and I can do book clubs or, book events or library events or whatever, across the country, sometimes even internationally. And
Mhm.
all of that, it's just incredible that I can, sit here in my house and talk to readers everywhere. It's just really amazing. And I love that. I think as writers, we sit there alone with our computer and our characters, and it's very just inward. We don't really get to experience that, putting it out there and getting that feedback until we're able to connect with readers, online or at book events and things like that. And it's so amazing. I mean, I love to get that feedback, and I just love it. And readers are incredible people.
I think I feel this way, and I'm sure so many readers do too, but it's really cool for us to have that same thing via Instagram or something. Like, feel like you can get to know one of your favorite authors. It's like you can do it with a celebrity, but it's different with books. And it's just like, it's really cool to get to like put a face to the person who's writing these words that you read in these stories that you fall in love with.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like, an author is the kind of thing that they would just be a name on a book, if you couldn't have
Mhm.
any sort of interaction with them. So I love that. I mean, it's been incredible. I know that there are some authors that'll hire somebody to do their social media, but that's something I would never give up.
So every episode on my show, I start off talking about something that I'm obsessed with that week. It can be book related. It doesn't have to be. So for example, this week I'm obsessed with my one of my favorite shows, Summer House on Bravo, because there's crazy drama happening. Is there anything that you are currently obsessed with?
So my husband and I feel like we're always like 2 years like late. But it's maybe not that bad this time, but we just started watching Serial. Or I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, no, oh my gosh, now I'm totally blanking. That's not what it's called. The Tourist. Oh my gosh, The Tourist, which is on Netflix. But
Oh, I haven't seen
I think
that.
it originally came out a couple of years ago, but it's just come to Netflix. So it's really, really popular right now, with Jamie Dornan, and we're only a few episodes in, but it's so good. It's dark. It's super dark, but it's also got this like dark comedy to it too. It's a little quirky at times, and I'm loving it. So I just can't wait to see where it goes.
So Jamie Dornan is one of my rotating cast members. So I think I have to watch this now
I
as
think
like
you should.
research for reading my books.
You absolutely need to.
So you did mention very briefly earlier that something you're working on now. Is there anything you can tell us about what's up next for you?
So it's totally like in the baby stages. So I don't there's not too much I can share just because I'm still figuring so much out. But I will say that this one, I changed up the setting a little bit. It is two Chicago families because I feel like there has to be the connection. But they're actually on a vacation in the remote Northwoods of Wisconsin. They've rented two
Oh,
cottages and gone up to Wisconsin. So it's fun in that it's a little bit. I love it's a creepy setting. I love creepy settings, but it's just more remote, and I love that. So a couple people winds up dead, and then there's a mystery developing there.
a couple people are
A couple
dead.
people. Just be one.
Okay, I'm obviously obsessed already. And where can everybody find you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook and Instagram would be like the best places to find me. I'm on X. I'm not as good about it, and I do have a TikTok account, but I'm really not good about that one. So Instagram and Facebook are the best places to go.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I could really just sit here and pick your brain forever. And if we were talking about spoilers, this would probably be hours long because I would just need to know every single thing. I really, really love this book. I think for anyone listening, if you're looking for a perfect page turner, it's so unique. It takes a lot to like make my jaw drop, and you did that a few times. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so much fun.